This is From the Courtroom to the Boardroom, the podcast for the next generation of legal leaders with me, Simon Gibson. I was a lawyer for 13 years until I walked away from legal practice and entered the world of business. I'm now CEO of the Spirent Group and I lead a portfolio of businesses in the UK and Australia. On this upbeat podcast, I tackle the big issues facing law firms and businesses alike with the help of intriguing guests. Are you ready to rewrite the script? Then it's great to have you along for the ride. Hello, friends. Welcome to the podcast. As ever, very grateful to you for your company. Many law firms and businesses are considering international expansion as an opportunity that's well worth looking into. My group expanded our legal services into Australia in 2017. It's been a very positive experience, but a roller coaster of ups and downs. I'm very interested in the fact that in recent years, some of the larger international practices have expanded their businesses to the Middle East. And I'm interested to learn, bearing in mind the growing business community throughout the Middle East, the investment that it's taken place there, and of course, the significant wealth in some parts of the area, whether this is a part of the world which ambitious law firms should set their sights upon. Now, from personal experience, I do know that another issue that we must bear in mind when considering international expansion is the issue of protecting our intellectual property across borders, particularly as rules can change from one country to another. Now, I'm absolutely delighted to say that my expert guest today is somebody who can help us with all of these problems. My guest today is one of the most well-known lawyers in the Middle East, who is attorney Rany SADER. Rany is the fifth generation of the SADER family, which is a group which have become synonymous with legal education, legal practice, and innovation in the Middle East. I'm delighted to welcome Rany and to tell you that the group's work in SADER, in legal education, in resourcing and publishing since the 1800s, is managing to bridge the gap between law and innovation in that part of the world. The SADER Group have implemented a number of cutting-edge technology platforms, including SADER UniPro, which is the first mobile education app throughout the Arab world, and it aims to improve the educational journey for law students in that area. Away from his role in leading SADER, Rany is one of the world's best-known intellectual property experts. He's a prolific author in the field. He speaks also throughout the world on this topic, and he works alongside governments, regulators, and businesses to help them protect their intellectual property rights wherever they operate. Really thrilled to welcome Rany to the podcast. So without further ado, Rany, welcome. How are you, sir?
Thank you so much for the introduction. Frankly, that was too much. Everything is quite good. Thank you.
Well, I had to say, I mentioned this to producer before we started, your achievements are so wide-ranging that we could be here all day just working through your CV, but we're not going to do that because you've got lots of valuable information to share with our audience, Rany. So first of all, you were born in Lebanon, as I recall, is that right?
Exactly. I'm born in Lebanon in 1974. So as you said, I'm the fifth generation of the oldest legal information provider in the Middle East. So we started exactly in 1863, and then we did a lot of expansion since that. Practically, we're well known for everything related to rule of law. So we have facilitated access to legal information for people from around the world. It's not only for lawyers and judges, but practically we've worked across sectors, different sectors to facilitate that. And definitely I'm also an IP lawyer. That's part of my hobbies. So I enjoy intellectual property, being, coming from a legal publishing family. So intellectual property has always been something very important in my career and in my life.
Well, it's very clear from the books that you've written and the invitations to speak you've had across the world. But just before we get stuck into those, just tell us a little bit about Lebanon as a country and what your upbringing was like and the early stages of your legal education.
Okay, frankly, Lebanon is one of the oldest in the Middle East when it comes to rule of law and, having a full-fledged legal structure. So, as you may know, we're trilingual as Lebanese. So we had the influence of the French culture practically, and then with the globalization, currently the English language is one of our main. So we had this, I would say, blessing of knowing the Anglo-Saxon part of the law, and then the Romano-Germanic, as we say, the European part as well. Lebanon, when it comes to its legal structure, it's very ancient. So as Lebanese, practically we've been in on this land like from 6,000 years or a little bit less. Our legal structure and legal system, we are a democratic country. We have a freedom of speech since ever. Our law schools have been here for 100 years and more. So really from a pure legal background, I think we're well established.
Yes, and I mean, that's interesting what you say about freedom of speech, because that's been pivotal to the law, I think, in most developed countries for some years. But tell me, whilst you had the earlier part of your life in education in Lebanon, you've worked not just over the Middle East, but extensively in that period of time, in that part of the world. Tell me, since the international law firms, I know that Dentons have a presence in the Middle East, Herbert Smith, I believe, have as well. Are Western or European or American law firms entering in the Middle East? How are they perceived by Middle Eastern businesses and consumers? And is there a relationship of trust?
Well, frankly, it depends. So we have several categories that we have to take into consideration. First of all, if we're talking about high-level knowledge when it comes to complex and structured projects, agreements, etc., definitely we all recur to the international experience. So we have to differentiate here in between three categories. You have practically the mere population. If someone has a simple problem, he might definitely go to a local law firm. And then you have the middle-sized, the SMEs and the startups. It depends on what kind of new ideas they are bringing to the market. And then you go to the more complex legal matters, where definitely the input of the international community through international law firms or international legal experts joining local law firms are very essential. So definitely it depends. Now you have a lot of international law firms operating in the Middle East. So you have mentioned 2 or 3 of them, but definitely you have more than 35 to 40, up to my knowledge, international law firms. And I'm only talking about the international law firms. Now, if you're talking about the legal information providers as well, you have LexisNexis, you have Thomson Reuters and the like. So it's really an emerging market. It has its own challenges. I think we're going to have time to talk about that. But when we're talking about trust, definitely there is a huge trust in the international legal community being established in the Middle East.
I think that's going to be very reassuring to hear for any law firm which is planning to include the Middle East in its international plan. When we moved our law firm and our legal tech services into the Australian market. It's very interesting that you make that differentiation between the consumer and businesses, because we found something very similar. I tend to think businesses are just used now. They're familiar with dealing with international contacts and partners and suppliers. I think particularly culturally, any business which is expanding, whether that be into the USA or the Middle East or Australia or for that matter into Europe, this issue of the culture of the people who they will either be working alongside or potentially servicing is something which we really must prioritize. Is that your view?
Well, definitely yes. And what you've just mentioned is that a UK firm is being established in Australia. It's the Commonwealth. It's the same culture. It's the same language, etc. Well, having a German or a French law firm or even a UK law firm joining, being established in the Middle East is much more complex, I think. First of all, we have always to take into consideration the cross-cultural issues. And even in the Arabic world, when we're talking about the Middle East, we're talking about several cultures within the Arabic world. So when you're talking about Lebanon, you have a full freedom of speech. It's not regulated. We're really independent when it comes to such democracy. But when you go further into several other legislations, you don't find the same, maybe, freedom of speech. Even when we're talking about, just for you to know, we have around 18 million words in the Arabic language. So we're much, I'm not sure how many words we have in English. Maybe we have around 6 or 7 million. So it's very rich. And you have to know that in the Arabic world, we don't speak the same language. So we speak Arabic, but it's very different. Like we here in Lebanon, we speak a different Arabic than people in the Gulf or in Morocco or in Algeria. So that is another problem. So you have, first of all, the cross-cultural things. So maybe the culture we have in Lebanon might be different than the one that we have in Dubai or the one we have in other part of the Arab world. So, and then you have the religious part. So you have a lot of regulatory, if we're talking about total beverage, for example. So dealing with total beverage in Lebanon is different than Jordan, is different than Egypt, and is different than Gulf and Saudi Arabia, definitely.
Yes, and just touching back on the language issue, in terms of the way language is used in society and culturally, I mean, clearly that's something which any European or American practice entering the region would have to, I would imagine, bring people on board who could help with that. In terms of the actual language of the law or language of business, just what language letters are written in, the language that's spoken in courts, is there any consistency in that, or does that tend to differ per country as well?
Okay, here we have to differentiate in between three parts. First of all, if we're talking about the courts, usually it's the Arabic languages. Definitely in all our laws within the Middle East, you have the right of having a translator. So you can never, a judge can never hear anyone without having a translator if he's not if he doesn't speak Arabic. This is one. Second, in some parts of the Middle East, and I'll give an example like the UAE, where you have the Dubai International Financial Center, the DIFC, where it's the English court through retired English judges practically who deal with the cases, and then the language is practically the English language in general. And then you have not to forget about the other part when it comes to conflict resolutions is the arbitration, mediation, and all those. So practically it depends which languages the parties decide. Now, going back to the businesses, we have also to differentiate in between the high-level businesses like the multinationals, etc. At the end of the day, the language is the English language. So most of our emails, when it comes to our multinational clients or parties, are in English. But when we're addressing the government, usually the official language is Arabic. So it's always translated into Arabic. So you have also here to take into consideration the amount of work that we do when it comes to regulations and regulatories. So practically whatever product you have to bring to the Middle East, we don't have the same regulatory. So it's not like the EU, for example, where you have one single regulatory if you want to import any product. Well, it depends on each and every country.
Yes, and I mean, any law firm considering any form of international expansion really must make sure that they do their due diligence properly in terms of all these really important areas. You mentioned earlier, Rany, some of the other challenges which any business and any law firm might face in doing business, in expanding in the Middle East. Obviously, we've mentioned language and culture. Are there any other challenges which businesses looking to expand in that part of the world might face?
Well, definitely. Well, the limit is the sky. We have a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities, because I always consider that any challenge is an opportunity at the end of the day. First of all, we have the legal and regulatory environment in the Middle East. So people, they consider the Middle East as one single body. People have, law firms have to know that it's not. So if I want to establish, if I want to establish a law firm or anything in the Middle East, approaching Dubai courts is different than approaching a KSA regulatory when it comes to that. So it's not the same regulatory. Part of this world you might not have, except by a royal decree, a license to become a law firm in the Middle East. So you will always need a local partner. And this is a major issue. I'll give an example when it comes to freedom of speech or the different cultural thing that we have. So sometimes a local partner in an international firm might find it very difficult to apply all the LGBT part, related to the international standards, where we have local laws to adapt. So those are really day-to-day headaches that we have to take into consideration. So obtaining a license is not always as easy as we think. Definitely, if we're talking about the global 10 big law firms, it will be easier than a middle-sized law firm who would like really to venture itself in the Arab world. I'll also talk about compliance with anti-money laundering. So practically in the Middle East, reaching the law when it comes to money laundering is easier than in Europe. So we have definitely our regulations, etc. But it's the culture. I always consider that the culture is very important, and being and without giving a specific legislation or a specific jurisdiction, practically when you see 160 or 180 nationalities coming to a country like Dubai, definitely cross-cultural issues would be much bigger than a simple country where you have 3, 4, 5, 10 nationalities doing investment. So I'm giving you those. Definitely I won't talk again about the cultural and language barrier. So and I've created a new word, frankly, that I have I registered it as a trademark. It's localization, L-A-W-calization, okay? So we always talk I'm an IP lawyer, so whenever I'm in a business meeting, everybody will tell me that, okay, I'm not sure if If I'm going to the Dubai jurisdiction, I'm an arbitration fan. If anything happens, I'm going to the ICC. And I always tell them, guys, that the more you go international, at the end of the day, you have to go back local. Because if you need to take any measure on a building in Dubai, you have to go to the Dubai local authorities and abide by their law and by the UAE federal and then the Dubai local laws. So at the end of the day, I'm a fan of localization. And here, we're having a lot of problems with the international newcomers. So being a patent lawyer maybe in the US, I might have all the knowledge to become a patent lawyer in the UAE or in KSA or in Qatar, because it's the international standards and the international know-how. But when it comes to more local legal culture, okay, like execution of awards, then being the best UK lawyer in the UK does not mean that you might have a real successful practice in the UAE, because you go more to the local part. And here I'll talk more about the access to information. So thanks to the global legal knowledge players like LexisNexis and Thomson Reuters, practically the foreign community, the non-Arabic speaker community are having access to a lot of legal information. But practically it's translated. So going back to roots, if I have access to 1 million or 2 million documents, a UK lawyer will have access to 200 or 300,000 document in English. So practically, this is also a barrier, that they need to consider.
Well, I mean, there's two things that have really resonated with me there, Rany. I mean, the first point is I absolutely agree with you that no business can assume that just because they've made a success of their business model or their strategy in a given country, like the UK, they cannot assume that they will just be able to jump off a plane and implement that success in a new country without impediment. And I think there's two reasons for that. The first one is just all of the local challenges from a regulatory perspective, from a legal perspective, culturally, that they will face. But secondly, there's kind of a mindset problem there, because if a foreign law firm simply assumes that they do it better than the local competitors, I think they will immediately be faced with problems. So what I always say is be humble. When you're entering into a new country, work on the basis that you don't know best. You need the market more than the market needs you. So exercise humility, listen, learn, and show respect to local cultures, local people, and local businesses.
I cannot agree more, Simon, frankly. So definitely. And if we want to go into details, we have big names in the Middle East. When it comes to the largest law firm in the Middle East, it's not a foreign global law firm. It's Al-Tamimi and Company. It's one of the largest, the biggest. They are well implemented. They are always working in a strategy where they have local partners, knowing the culture, etc. And this is a proof that having a big name and a huge success outside the region might not lead to the same success in another region.
Podcast today is brought to you by Zeus Tech Solutions, who provide dev on demand for law firms. When I was managing partner of a law firm, recruiting and retaining top tech talent was one of the biggest challenges. And worse still, because we didn't have the knowledge in the business to manage and coach a technical team, it was a constant cycle of frustration, downtime, lost revenue, and proclaim lying dormant. Well, for the past 5 years, Zeus have looked after both of Spirent Group's law firms in the UK and Australia, and it's been a game changer. Now we get all of our tech on tap, from IT director to .NET developer. We get that whenever we want. Zeus provide the best use of tech to all of our fee earners with no recruitment fees and absolutely no nonsense. So if you're a law firm who are frustrated with their tech anywhere in the world, go to www.zeustechsolutions.co.uk and hit the live chat option, and the answer to all of your tech solutions, however specific they are, is right there. Better still, if you mention that you heard about Zeus on the podcast, you will get a free health check for your case management system. So that's Zeus Tech Solutions, dev on demand for law firms. And now on with the podcast.
The other thing which really interested me in what you said, Rany, is you've referred to as an example of the cultural and I guess the legal differences as well, in terms of how the LGBT community could be, rightly or wrongly, could be treated in different ways in different countries. Now, we won't get into the argument of different rules in different areas and whether they're right and whether they're wrong. What I would just say is, what would your view be on a westernized law firm, perhaps one from the UK or America, one which really prioritizes diversity and inclusion and has these as strong values of their law firm? If they were entering any particular region of the Middle East, would they need to consider compromising those values or sort of toning them down in order to be consistent with the local culture and law?
Well, I won't go into details and give my personal opinion, definitely. But definitely we have a lot of restrictions in the Middle East, and it's quite a lot of differences from a country to another. Like if we take Lebanon, definitely we're much open when it comes to such inclusiveness, etc. But if we go into other countries, we have a lot of laws until now that restrict mainly such inclusion. And so this is the human capital department will have to work a lot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, isn't it? We just need to add that to our due diligence and to be mindful of the realities of the situation. And again, it's back to this issue of if you're entering a new market, you do take it as you find it. And for sure, if you land in a market where you can influence law and opinion and precedent, that's a good thing to do. But it won't necessarily change immediately. So I completely see what you're saying.
But definitely we're not talking about the equity and equality when it comes to in between men and women. So practically, definitely, we're seeing a lot of endeavors within the Middle East. Like I'm telling you, at SADER, now being a 160 years company, we have different culture mainly, but we're 100% on a 50-50 basis when it comes to equity and equality at all levels. So it's not only having 50-50 when it comes to numbers in between males and females, if I can say this, but definitely when it comes to salary, to recruitment and everything related to that. So,
well, I mean, it's wonderful to hear you say that, Rany, because I mean, to have leaders such as yourself who are promoting such a positive message is how positive change will be made. And I mean, certainly these issues of an imbalance between men and women, for example, in the leading positions in the law and business, that certainly is not an issue that's restricted to the Middle East. I mean, there've been a number of reports in the UK and the US which suggest that we also have a long way to go. And I think to have leaders who are promoting that positivity, such as yourself, is a very good thing.
If I may emphasize on this, at the end of the day, look, I'm coming from a cult-like company, so I always say that a company in the Middle East which is working in rule of law and in the legal sector, having seen several world wars, several internal wars, if I'm talking only about Lebanon, etc., we have to think differently at the end of the day. So practically, We're humans after all. And if we really need to consider the evolution of any community, we have to give women the right of being business leaders and mothers. Because in my opinion, being a mother is one of the best jobs that have been ever created. And it's a 24/7 duty. So practically, I'm telling you, like us in SADER, you'll be shocked that we usually give 6 months. If whenever a newborn is one of our associates delivers. So practically, yes, it's 6 months. So the Lebanese laws gives her 40 to 60 days. But for us, at the end of the day, it's not only the highest on the payroll who stays in a company. It's when people feel part of the family, part of the magic, part of the society. And this is what I really emphasize on, because practically it's not only a P&L, if we're getting money or not, that would give a stability in this world. Practically it's firms that really have values, that think differently, that would give stability.
That's right.
It's a little bit emotional maybe, but this is part of our DNA, so I'm sharing it with you.
Well, we're ever so grateful, and I mean, let's get it right out. The fact that you've been doing this as a family business since the 1800s suggests that you've managed to get that balance between fair profitability and strong values pretty much right.
Exactly.
And I have to say, I agree with you that every business wants to make good levels of income and profit. However, your people will only be retained and retain their full productivity and positivity if they think of their journey with you as involving something much deeper and more important than money. So credit to you, sir, for continuing that ethos over so many years as fifth generation.
Thank you so much.
I really want to talk to you about intellectual property because, of course, aside from leading the SADER Group, you are a global expert in this field of IP. And, of course, when we talk about expansion across borders, when we think about things like trademarks, copyright, products and services, it's so important not only that we keep protecting those in mind, but that we also be mindful of the fact that rules and laws across borders can differ. So I just wondered, first of all, how can businesses considering expansion either to the Middle East or anywhere in the world, what are the main things people need and businesses need to bear in mind to protect their IP?
Well, practically the Arab world is part of the international community. And as you may know, we have the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is really doing a lot of work to harmonize IP protection in the world. So mainly all the Arabic countries are part of the WIPO treaties. When it comes to the cultural part, maybe we need to work on much more awareness. But if we see across the Middle East, we're seeing a lot of NGOs like the EPA, the Emirates Intellectual Property Association, the Brand Protection Group Lebanon, which was established in 2002, which I preside currently, the Brand Protection Group UAE, the PPI, and I don't want to just give you names. So we have a lot of work being done when it comes to awareness. Definitely in the Arab world, IP is kind of a new thing, except in Lebanon, where we will be celebrating next year 100 years of intellectual property. So our first intellectual property law was being done during the French mandate mandat, so practically in 1924. This is why when it comes to intellectual property in Lebanon, you see court decisions which are really at a very high standards. Now, across the Middle East, we have 2-3 systems. We're seeing how Saudi Arabia, they established the Saudi Arabia IP Authority, which is one of, currently they are trying to become one of the leading authorities in intellectual property by all means in the region. And I think the gentlemen and the ladies are doing a lot of great work. So practically, when it comes to intellectual property laws are there. It's it's not the jungle part of the world. No, we have our laws. And in practice, definitely, that when it comes to practice, maybe we don't have sufficient IP, I would say, maybe in the practice part, IP is not as protected as its laws, because you have the economic part, you have a lot of politics, etc. And IP and economy, when you're a receiver in a country, because if you're talking about the German automobile or the UK total beverage industry, definitely all the government is behind such industries. But when you are a receiver, practically you will have a lot of challenges to do. I don't know if I explained
you did.
myself right. We can really.
No. I was absolutely clear on it. It's the balance, isn't it, between if you think about intellectual property, protection is never straightforward, and certainly what you've described there is some of the detail in the Middle East. So it's really helpful. We live in a time now of unrivaled innovation in terms of emerging technology, artificial intelligence. I always think of innovation as having been globalized. I guess now some years ago, but the pace of that innovation, globalization seems to be increasing day after day. In terms of your experience as an intellectual property expert, what are some of the key principles that innovators need to bear in mind when considering how they protect their IP?
Okay. First of all, we have to agree all that ideas are not protected. So if I disclose an idea to you now and anyone executes it, definitely I cannot sue him or her. So practically, this is one of the things that people always consider, that I'm protecting my idea. It's the execution of ideas which is really protected. This is one. Second, I always say that people should have an IP strategy. And there, if we're talking about multinationals, definitely they have the means to protect themselves. But if we're talking about a startup, and I deal with a lot of startups practically, where people would come to me and tell me, I got an investment of $50,000 to $100,000. I need to start protecting myself. I'm considering in my business plan to open in the US, in the UK, in China, Dubai, KSA, etc. And then I need a plan to protect myself in all those. This is my brand, this is my trademark. So please, attorney, find a way to protect me. And then this is what I always tell them. When it comes to startups, the vehicle should not be in front of the horses. Mainly a startup should invest in what the gentlemen or the ladies do best. So practically, they have to invest in their idea. Now, protecting it, I would always start with copyright, because for people who know about copyright, it's practically any execution of an idea is protected as soon as we can provide proofs that we have created it. So it's not like a trademark, we need to register it. Practically, I always tell people that you need to prove that. So the best thing is to go to the post, put whatever scenario you have, whatever source code you have, and you send it to yourself. So you get a date on it, and then you leave it in the safe. and whenever you want, because there is a conflict of interest in between disclosing an idea and developing it and protecting it. If I'm going to the ministry to register a copyright, practically I'm disclosing it. So if I'm a film writer and I really do not want to disclose the whole idea because I didn't finish the script I'm working in, practically I start protecting it without disclosing it through the post by sending myself a mail, and then definitely I won't go into the digital, the emails, etc. I'm talking about a very simple, traditional idea to protect ourselves. And then I can develop my idea so that I can create a history for the idea. So if I'm disclosing it one day, I can tell the judge or the arbitrator or anyone, well, that this is how my idea went to life. This is one. So the IP strategy is very important, going back to that. And the IP strategy should go in pair with our business strategy. So practically, if I invented something in Lebanon and I really need to expand it to the Arab region, I cannot go and register it in all the Arab countries, because you have to know that in the Arab world, the fees to register trademarks, for example, are excessively higher than other parts of the world. And this is why, as IP fans, we're always talking about the regulators, that if we really need to boost the innovation, we have to consider the IP fees that we're paying to register trademarks and the like in the region.
Fascinating. And I mean, we're going to include at the bottom of the podcast description, Rany, links to your website and to your social media channels. I've seen some really great videos that you put on YouTube for SADER. But if a firm is listening to this, if a business is listening or watching the podcast, and they're considering perhaps Middle East expansion, but expansion generally, and they have IP which they want to protect, can they get in touch with you for your professional help?
Well, of course. And this is what I do with a lot of newcomers to the region. Practically, I'm always being asked if it's better to do an investment in Egypt than the KSA, or the Arab world is not a small part of this world.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and I do completely understand this issue of sort of territorial selection in terms of your business plan, or perhaps territorial prioritization. And I would think that doesn't just apply to the Middle East. I know that conversations I've had in the USA, for example, suggest that because their states are effectively regulated like different countries, that degree of selection is also important there. And I'm sure that IP is one of the areas that are particularly important. So, I mean, Rany, we've talked a lot about your past and your present in terms of your work. What's next for you? And for the SADER Group, what future projects do you have on the horizon?
Okay, so frankly, I'm a believer of what I call the vertical legal knowledge industry. So currently we're having a lot of horizontal knowledge through our WhatsApp, through our LinkedIn, etc. So currently we're working on what we call the vertical legal knowledge. The vertical legal knowledge, like we're creating the largest trilingual sports law database in the world, Middle East sports law. Practically, we have 55 on advisory board from leading sports lawyers in the world from 25 nationalities. So this is one of the things we're doing. Second, we're launching something related to the fashion law, where we're also being endorsed by leading global fashion houses, because access to specific legal knowledge is becoming, and valuable, unique content is becoming more and more of importance. And definitely, I will disclose to you that I'm proudly saying that we are launching with one of the largest total beverage global player in the world, the first total beverage legal database. And this is why I would tell you my opinion about the legal industry and the perfect storm. Practically from where I am, and I've been privileged to be a legal knowledge leader in the Middle East, an IP lawyer working with a lot of leading brands, global leading brands, without mentioning names, and I've worked on a lot of legal tech work as rule of law within the Middle East, practically. So I think that the legal industry and the perfect storm has three main components. The first one, and it's coming. People, they think that being the largest law firm now is something that I can really keep on doing for the generation to come. Well, I have a different vision regarding this. First of all, I think that there is a rise of what I call the legal innovation catalyst in the multinationals. So all the multinationals are considering how they can really make their legal department more productive, more productive and more efficient, I would say. So we're seeing a lot of projects from multinationals. We've heard Elon Musk informing people that he's launching. It was in March 2022, if I'm not mistaken, where he said that Tesla is building a hardcore litigation department. So you're seeing global people talking about, business people talking about how they can change the legal industry. So first of all, we have the rise of the legal innovation catalyst. Then we have the importance of big legal data. And the big legal data is not really in law firms. Definitely we have quite a bunch of law firms who have real big data, but compared to a government, if I take the UAE as an example, I don't think that the wealth that the UAE Ministry of Justice has when it comes to legal knowledge through the court decisions that they have is comparable to any big data that any law firm has. So we're seeing that the big legal data is becoming mainly in between the hands of the government and the big legal knowledge players like maybe LexisNexis, Thomson Reuters, and definitely SADER if we're talking about the Middle East. So this is also another big change where law firms need to be aware of. And then we have the third component, which is the power of artificial intelligence and the arrival of robotics. Practically, we're seeing the ChatGPT now. People are talking about the value, the sources they are using, etc. And let me tell you that my opinion, humbly, when it comes to the legal information is not a static information. Practically, legal information is a living information, especially when we have a new law which abolish 10,000 legal cases because they changed the course of the law itself. So practically it would be a headache. But when we will have those three components together, I think the tsunami is coming and it will hit the legal industry in a big way. So
I mean, there's just a couple of points I'd just like to come back on because there's so much interesting stuff there. First of all, this issue of general innovators in business seeing the legal sector as an area which is in need of technological reform. I think this is definitely something we're going to increasingly see because the legal market is so huge and because it is becoming an increasingly globalized market. So law firms who are resistant to change do need to bear in mind that there are certain issues that may get outside of their control unless they're prepared to embrace technological change. Just one question I've got for you, though, on this very interesting point you've made around the emergence and the advancement of artificial intelligence. You speak to many law firms and law students and regulators across the world. Do you think the artificial intelligence is being viewed as an opportunity or as a threat?
Well, in my opinion, it is not only an opportunity, it's a culture that we will be facing and we will be living with. So practically, it is definitely an opportunity, it's not a threat. I won't go into my personal opinion. Whenever AI and robotics will have a cognitive feeling, and then they can really create, because until now, and this is something I was discussing with a couple of leading lawyers in the Middle East a couple of days ago. I don't know if Henry Ford used ChatGPT back in time, and he told them that I need something, a better transportation, mechanism. I don't know what ChatGPT with all the AI created a car, or they would have given him ideas about a faster horse. So for me, until now, look, artificial intelligence for me, it's a database. So I also come from a family which have dealt with knowledge for such a long history. Practically, it depends on the information you're giving it. So I don't want to go into content creation versus innovation. Definitely artificial intelligence at this stage, from a legal perspective, in the legal industry, would help people be more creative when it comes to their content. But it would give us an idea that, if materialized, would make us a millionaire. I'm not sure at this stage, because the information we are giving to our machines are limited in capacity. I don't know if you agree or disagree. It's subjects. It's very personal.
Well,
very new.
I mean, I think that the what artificial intelligence does now is it gives us the potential to be so much more efficient in terms of areas such as content creation. And also, I agree that it has the potential to have a positive influence on a number of areas of employment. But I do make you right that the businesses who are rushing to present the current stage of AI as an area which can be truly game-changing from a business and from a lifestyle perspective could be premature. But I certainly think if we wind the clock forward 5 years or so, we might be having a different conversation. And I'm like you, I'm an optimist. I think that we should be positive about change.
I'm also an optimist, but let's rewind and remind ourselves 5 years, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, when Steve Jobs created the iPhone, everybody invested in apps. How many apps are you using now?
Not many, if I'm honest.
Exactly.
Perhaps half a dozen.
Neither do I. But in my opinion, changing a culture, for me, it is an opportunity. But changing a culture, changing human nature, it will always need time. And this is what people are, they are not taking it into consideration, in my opinion. So we will need time. It's a culture that will be established. It's like pre-Google, or it's pre-Britannica and after Britannica. Back in time, if someone has the Encyclopedia Britannica, it was like he was the mastermind of the village. Then we had the computer, we had Google. Before Google Maps, I don't know how we used to drive, frankly.
No,
and now
true.
we have the ChatGPT, exactly. So it's something that we will be used to, but it will not change our lives at this stage. In the coming 10, 15, 20, when you will have a robot that you don't know if you call it or she or he, then with all those, with the cognitive or without the cognitive part, then the world would be different.
And I think it certainly will be different. It's been such a pleasure having your company today. We are coming to the end now. As I said, all of your links are there for the audience. I would advise everyone to read the fascinating history of SADER as a group and of Rany in terms of his own career. It really is quite remarkable when you read the sheer breadth of the work that yourself and the other generations of your family have delivered in the Middle East and elsewhere. And I've got ever so much a lot of value from talking to you. And I know our audience will have as well. So thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast, and all the very best of luck to you, Rany.
Thank you so much, Simon. Well, I'm shocked that the 43 minutes are up. I thought we're still in the 5-10 minutes. I was enjoying it much. So thank you so much for your trust. I hope I was up to the expectations, and definitely if I can be of any help, I'm always happy to do.
Rany, good luck, and thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much.